we know that this work is critically important, and it's only through this social fabric and collaboration that we'll be able to drive lasting impact.
Please join us in thanking and welcoming Monica Schroeder, our keynote speaker tonight for the Do Good Better 2026 conference.
Thank you, Emmy, for that wonderful introduction. It's very flattering. I am so pleased to be here tonight, and thank you all for such a warm welcome to the Ballard Center and to Brigham Young University. I am a firm believer in show and then tell. And so before I launch into some remarks, I wanted to share with you a film actually that we premiered just a few weeks ago that I hope will illustrate some of the voices and faces behind our work and show a little bit about the impact. This film is called The Last Shelter. It was directed by Nepali filmmaker Rajan Khattet, who looked at, and really worked with and engaged with Build Change's programs and many of the homeowners that we worked with over the last year. We were so happy to produce this in collaboration with the Skoll Foundation, and it is hot off the presses. We just premiered this 2 weeks ago, so this is officially the Brigham Young University premiere of The Last Shelter. And so I'll pass it to Emmy to get the film started, and then you'll hear plenty from me after. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that that gave you a little bit of a glimpse of the kind of work that we do in the disaster mitigation space. I wanted to first thank, the Ballard Center for inviting me to speak this evening, my incredible colleagues who do the work that you saw in this video every day, tirelessly in so many countries in the world, and all of you for your interest and commitment to making the world a better place to live. I am here to talk about disaster resilient housing, but before I get to that, I am so pleased to be at BYU's campus. I've gotten the full experience. I've gotten a campus tour. I've gotten a beautiful introduction to the university. And I love the fact that this kind of convening exists. I feel a great kinship to BYU, not only because I myself attended the University of Notre Dame, where faith and justice and academics are very closely intertwined, just like BYU, but also because BYU and Notre Dame were both deeply wronged this year by a system known as the college football playoff. I hope you don't hold it against us that we didn't go to the Pop-Tart Bowl. Congratulations to you all for your win. I wanted to start today with an excerpt from a poem that I find very powerful from a piece by Warsan Shire, a Somali British author, from a poem that she wrote called Home. She says, "You only leave home when home won't let you stay. No one leaves home until home is a sweaty voice in your ear saying, 'Leave. Run away from me now. I don't know what I've become, but I know that anywhere is safer than here.'" So I'm Monica Schroeder. I am the Vice President of Global Engagement at Build Change, and I'm happy to tell you a little bit about my own story as well. I'm a Navy brat. I moved about a dozen times before I graduated high school. My mother is from Colombia, and she lived in the country at a time where conflict and insecurity were at its peak. I'm also a mom, and I love creating a space where my daughter can feel safe and loved. So I do what I do because I know the value of a home, not just as a structure, but as a concept and as a source of grounding, and how important it is to be safe in that home. Build Change, the organization where I work, is a nonprofit founded in 2004 with a singular vision: that everyone has access to a disaster-resilient home. Our founder, Dr. Elizabeth Hausler, a civil engineer by training and a lifelong Mason, saw that post-disaster aid in the housing sector was stuck. There were shelter programs, but very little permanent housing programs. And even more so, when there were permanent housing programs, people were being given houses, often that didn't suit their needs or didn't suit the climate, rather than being agents in their own recovery. In the old model of aid, we asked homeowners who were already overwhelmed with disaster recovery to provide sweat equity, to pick up a shovel, and provide the manual labor. But at Build Change, we believe that dignity doesn't come from a shovel. It comes from a seat at the table. We advocate for a model based on decision equity. Decision equity means that the homeowner is our primary client. It means that the homeowner gets the technical information, the financial options, and the architectural choices so that he or she can decide what their family needs. When we empower a homeowner to make decisions around their own roof, their own walls, their own finances, we aren't just building a house, we are building agency. Think about your own home for a second. If someone told you that they were going to fix your roof, but you had no say in the material, the color, the timeline, would you feel like a partner or a project for them to work on? That's what we're aiming to change. Markets serve customers, but humanitarians serve neighbors. And that's who we are. At Build Change, we work with the people that know their homes are not safe, and yet they don't have the resources to improve them. We work with the people who have that gnawing fear inside of them, that the next storm will threaten everything they hold dear, their family's safety, their most precious possessions, and their community. So let's talk a little bit about the problem of inadequate housing. UN Habitat estimates that by 2030, 3 billion people, 40% of the world's population, will be living in vulnerable housing. That's 1 in 3 people who tonight will go to sleep wondering if their roof will hold. This is the problem that Build Change addresses every day. How do we vastly reduce the number of deaths, injuries, and losses caused by unsafe buildings? And why are so many of these buildings unsafe? First, most of the world lives in self-built housing that has been constructed without an engineer or an architect. They've done what they could with the resources they had available, because engineering is expensive. Building a house to code is expensive. Cement is expensive, and people do the best they can. Second, most of the world thinks of disaster response as like a flashing red light. We wait for the earthquake to strike, and then we send the blankets, the tents, and the bottled water. We've been trapped in a post-disaster aid model. But the math of 3 billion people in vulnerable housing tells us that we can't afford to wait for tragedy to happen. So we at Build Change are shifting the narrative to focus on prevention to mitigate the impact of disasters. A disaster is only a disaster when hazard meets exposure and vulnerability. That's why we actually don't call them natural disasters at Build Change. We just call them disasters, because there is such a huge component of it that is a man-made problem. We can't stop the earthquake, we can't stop the typhoons, but what we can do is stop the building from falling. So we are pushing for a world where the last shelter isn't a tent in a refugee camp. It's the resilient, permanent home that was strengthened before the storm ever formed. At Build Change, what we've found is that changing housing system hinges on 3 things: policy, money, and technology. So first, do people have the right policy framework to support resilient construction at all income levels? Sometimes building codes are out of date or aren't taking into account current hazards in the environment. So we support governments to figure out what kind of code improvements, policies, and programs would help a greater number of people have access to resilient housing. Second, do they have access to the resources that they need to build a safe home? Usually for the homeowners that we work with, all of whom are low-income homeowners, the answer is no. They don't have those savings. So we work with the public sector to strengthen funds for housing, and with the private sector to develop accessible loan programs for home improvement to fill the gaps when necessary. And third, do they have access to the necessary technology? Technology is a super broad term. It can mean everything from construction materials to app development. Every place is different. Sometimes it's about mixing cement correctly. Sometimes it's about learning how to use locally sourced timber in housing designs. Sometimes we need technology to allow people at different ends of housing processes, a financial officer and an engineer, for example, to understand how to work together better. Build Change has been advancing this work for 22 years, and to date, we have made 1.5 million people and 300,000 buildings safer in over 30 countries worldwide. And I wanted to spend today introducing 3 fundamental approaches that have driven our work from the early days in 2004 after the Indian Ocean tsunami in Indonesia to most recently to Super Cyclone Cheeto in Mozambique. Those are 1, learn first and keep learning. It sounds a lot like loving the problem. I think they're very connected. Number 2, meet people where they are. And number 3, change the system, not just the structure. So let me start with the first approach. Learn first and keep learning. You need to understand the hazards, the culture, the power dynamics at play in the political structures. You need to understand what people want and need out of their homes. So this is why we work with local supply chains, local masons, construction workers, material suppliers to understand what's available in the current markets, what are they already doing, and help them optimize those processes and resources rather than reinventing the wheel. People know how to build houses. They've been doing it as long as humanity has been around. It's rather, how can we work with them to make sure that those houses are as safe as possible? If you don't start with learning, you end up with a house that nobody wants. This is Elizabeth. Elizabeth was our CEO for 20 years, and she was our founder. And she used to tell a story about families after the Gujarat earthquakes in India. They were given a brand new house, but after a few months, it was clear that they had blocked their front door and started using a side entry. So they were asked, well, what's wrong with your front door? The people who had built that house had put the front door on the wrong side of the house. It wasn't culturally appropriate. That's not where people entered their homes. And so they didn't use the door. And that seems like a major design flaw, right? Houses need to fit families, not the other way around. So we asked them, the homeowners that we work with, do they have an in-home business that they need to accommodate? How many children are there in the home? Is this a multi-generational household? Because when you have their needs in mind, housing is more than shelter. It's a place for them to grow and learn. Housing is the cornerstone to so many development outcomes: safety, economic mobility, health. Let me just give you a few statistics on the economics of housing from recent studies. The World Bank recently noted that housing often represents between 50 and 90% of families' assets on average, and are often passed from generation to generation as a tangible investment. We saw this with the homeowners in Nepal. You notice that both of them talked about the fact that they wanted to pass this house along to their children, to their grandchildren. These are the most important economic asset that these families have. Equitable access to adequate housing in informal settlements, looking at it from a macroeconomic scale, can generate a direct impact of as much as 10.5% GDP growth. That's huge. And then looking on the health side, a recent study by Habitat for Humanity showed that through access to resilient housing, globally, life expectancy could rise up to 4%, adding 2.4 years of life on average. Also immense for health outcomes. Housing unlocks so many opportunities in human development, which is why we at Build Change advocate so strongly for greater attention and investment in housing issues. And yet, housing is so specific and so personal that we need to start with learning if it has the hope to make a lasting impact that's really going to be a place that people feel comfortable developing their lives in. And then I wanted to talk about our second approach: meet people where they are. This is Josefina. This is a homeowner that we've worked with in the Philippines, and she has experienced frequent typhoons and heat. I wanted to read just a few lines from an interview that we did with Josefina a few years ago. She said, "My sibling provided us a place to live that was damaged already, but we accepted it just to have somewhere my family and I could go home to. When we were living in that house, we had a lot of leaks because it did not have proper roofing. It also didn't have sturdy walls. We just made a roof out of leaves and used bamboo to have walls for us to at least have a better place to sleep." Josefina and her husband had tried to do exactly what most people want to do: repair their house, but they didn't know how. Now, let me tell you a little bit of a story, because for anybody who has ever done a DIY project in their own home, you know the feeling of trying to do something on that house that you don't really know what to do, but you figure, I'll figure it out along the way. A few years ago, I tried to do what I thought was a pretty minor repair. I was changing out some light fixtures, and I worked really hard at it. I watched the YouTube video, I followed all the steps, and I ended up rewiring our child's bathroom light switch to control our bedroom closet. These rooms were several rooms away from each other. They were not even in the same vicinity. How did I do that? I don't know. I tried to fix it. I spent hours trying to fix it. And then my husband came upstairs and he said, "What are you doing? And why are you almost crying?" And I was truly on the verge of tears because I thought I had followed every step perfectly. And I could not figure out how to get it right. And so, as a loving husband would do, he said, "I think I'm going to call an electrician now." And the truth is that there's a reason why electricians and masons exist, because they are experts in their field. And while my example was pretty low stakes because of misplaced confidence in my own electrical skills, I thought I could do it, and the reality was I couldn't do it. But what happens when the stakes are higher? What happens when you can't afford the expertise that you need to make your house safer? What happens when you know another stronger typhoon is going to hit in a few months? What are you supposed to do about it? This is what we mean by meeting people where they are. Josefina and her husband had a house. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. So we work with what people have. We work with Josefina and her husband to understand their priorities. Beyond basic structural safety, what did they need for their house? And we help them retrofit it, that is, improve it for structural safety to make it a safer and more comfortable place to live. So let's visit Josefina after her house was improved. She said, "Now that we live here with our children, we feel secure that we will be safe even if there are typhoons. Now that our house is fixed, I don't need to worry much. I can now take care of my children and help with their education. Since I was too busy in the past, I really neglected that. Now that this is fixed, I will have the chance to concentrate on them and help them with their schooling. They are now safe, and we can look after them." This is Josefina with her newly retrofitted home. I'll talk about the third approach that guides our work, which is change the system, not just the structure. Josefina's peace of mind, wasn't the result of a single bag of cement or a single engineer. It was the result of an entire ecosystem working in harmony. We don't just fix houses at Build Change. We address the system that fails people and allows houses to be stuck in disrepair. There are so many actors that are involved in this process: governments, humanitarians, engineers, even the financial officers that approve loans. And there are so many processes involved: designs, permits, bills of quantity, quality assurance. These are the processes that separate people from a safe home. Imagine for a moment a working mother who lives in an informal home. She takes care of her children. She goes to her full-time job. She invests all of her money into day-to-day expenses and the well-being of her family. Savings are slim, so when does she have the time or the resources to take out a building permit? Sometimes building permits take a very long time, and they can be expensive, especially for low-income homeowners. This was the reality of so many of the homeowners that we were working with in Colombia. And we thought, well, what can we do about this? It's a housing issue, yes, but even more than that, it's a process issue. And so what we came up with was to work with city governments to roll out a program for free permitting for low-income homeowners to reduce the administrative barriers. That's what I mean by saying that we address the systems and the barriers that keep people from safe housing. The house itself is just a piece of the puzzle. So, who am I talking to you, and what role do I play at Build Change? My job is not to lay the bricks. I am not an engineer, and I am not an architect. My undergraduate degree was in French and Italian literature, which is a very different world away from what I'm doing now. I manage Build Change's external affairs, everything from advocacy with the United Nations and World Bank to overseeing the team that helped create the beautiful video that you saw earlier, to developing partnerships with philanthropy that enable us to have the resources to drive a greater impact. What I do is drive the change by finding solutions when the system is stuck. And the system can be stuck for many reasons. Lack of money. Sometimes it's stuck because people simply don't understand the complexity of the problem that we're dealing with. And so my role is to be the connective tissue between the technical experts on the ground and the global community that has the resources to back them. It's about advocacy, ensuring that somebody like Josefina, her voice is heard in the room when a policy is being written in a far-off capital or being heard by the lovely students here at the Ballard Center. It's about convincing philanthropists and foundations that housing is one of the most impactful and critical investments that they can make. Many people think of charity in terms of direct aid, give today to adopt an endangered species or provide a student with textbooks for a year. And let me be clear, that is so important and so needed in this world. But for us, philanthropy is about catalyzing innovation. It's the capital that allows us to prove that a new technology that works in a village in Indonesia can be scaled nationwide or adapted to other contexts. It's not just giving, it's an investment in a system that eventually pays for itself in lives saved and economies preserved. So you are all here at the Ballard Center because you want to be a force for good in one way or another. But being a force for good isn't a solo sport. Whether you're a business major or an engineer or even studying French literature like I did, you are a piece of this social fabric. And you can take your skills, whatever they are, to become a force for good. I got my first job in this space because I happened to speak French and I wanted to live internationally. I learned the rest as I went along. So you are already part of this ecosystem if you want to be. I know how vital this ecosystem is, not just because of my title, but because I know what it feels like when the ground you take for granted literally disappears. In May 2012, I was studying in Bologna, Italy, when a 6.1 magnitude earthquake hit 22 miles north of where I was living. In the middle of the night, my roommate shook me awake saying, "Earthquake, earthquake, run now." The walls were shaking. The paintings were falling off the wall. Threw on my shoes. We ran to the piazza close to our house. And everybody was sitting there. And they were trying to figure out, okay, what do we do now? What do we do now? A lot of people were praying. And I can imagine that the prayer was similar. Please let me be safe. Please let them be safe. Because we all share this need for safety. We all need have this shared need for shelter. You saw in the video today the lovely words of our homeowner saying, even a calf returns to shelter because he needs a place to stay. And so I hope that you all can take away this message of safety being critically important to drive social impact. We started today with the words of Worcestershire saying, home is a sweaty voice forcing you to, leave, essentially. What we want to do is to change that voice, and so that home becomes a place that people deserve to stay, that people have the right to stay, and that it can become a place for them to grow and learn and build lives that they can be proud of and that they can feel secure in. So I hope you take this, and you really drive your own, skills and adaptation to become a force for good in whatever world that is and whatever sector that is. Because we know that this work is critically important, and it's only through this social fabric and collaboration that we'll be able to drive lasting impact. Thank you so much.